In the year 70 AD, Roman legionaries, the deadliest killers of the ancient world, break into Jerusalem and freeze in disbelief. They have marched across half the world and seen mountains of corpses, but nothing prepared them for this. The city did not simply fall, it destroyed itself. Its defenders, instead of fighting Rome, cut their neighbors' throats, burned their own grain stores, and even swallowed gold coins to take their wealth with them into the next life. This is the chronicle of how blind fanaticism turned a holy city into a slaughterhouse, while the Romans only had to wait on the surrounding hills as the enemy wiped itself out.
It began not with a battle, but with silence. On a sun-scorched field near Ptolemais, thousands gathered before the tent of the Roman governor Petronius. They were not soldiers, but farmers, craftsmen, and old men. They came, abandoned their work, and lay down on the ground in complete silence, exposing their necks. Petronius saw thousands of blades, but not Roman ones. The Jews brought their own sickles and knives and held them out to the legionaries. The crowd's silence spoke louder than shouting. "Cut us down. We will not live in a world where the statue of Emperor Caligula stands in our temple." The governor, an old campaigner, faced something he had never met before, a people blackmailing him with their own suicide. This was not a riot, but an idea you cannot kill with a sword. War was postponed then, but the tension never went away. Into that crack poured the filth of corruption.
In Rome, the post of procurator of Judea was seen as a way to get rich quickly. Men came here not to govern, but to take. The last governor, Gessius Florus, took bribes from bandits and released them from prison, while his soldiers stormed homes and seized anything valuable. A simple merchant who had saved for a lifetime to buy a small plot of land could lose everything in an instant. A Roman official would simply declare the land to be the emperor's property. There were only two ways out: hand over everything or end up on a cross. Rome stopped being law and became a gangster carrying an imperial standard. In that atmosphere, terror was born. The Sicarii appeared, the dagger men. In the Jerusalem marketplace on the eve of a festival, in the heat and crush of the crowd, a wealthy high priest who called for peace could suddenly take a blade in the back.
In the stampede, no one noticed the quick movement. The victim fell, and the killer did not run. He stayed right there and shouted louder than anyone, "Catch the murderer!" A short, curved dagger, the sicca, was hidden in a sleeve. The Sicarii killed their own people, Jews willing to negotiate with Rome. They murdered the very possibility of compromise. The city fell silent. People were afraid to meet their neighbors' eyes because anyone could be the next assassin. Jerusalem became a sealed trap, soaked in hatred.
The conflict was set off by the procurator himself, Gessius Florus. Driven by greed, he entered the temple and took 17 talents of gold from the sacred treasury, claiming it was needed for the emperor. In response, people poured into the streets with begging baskets. They walked through the market, rattled coins, and pretended to sob. "Spare a coin for poor Florus, he has no money at all." The Roman governor could not tolerate the mockery. Florus returned with cavalry and ordered an attack right on the upper market. The Romans did not disperse the crowd, they butchered it. In a single day, 3,600 people died. The most prominent Jews, even Roman citizens, were seized and crucified among the stalls. The city choked on blood, but fear did not come. Rage did. Then came the event that cut off the road back.
The Roman garrison in the Antonia fortress entered negotiations with the rebels. The legionaries agreed to lay down their weapons in exchange for safe passage. Jewish leaders swore in the name of God that they would not be harmed. But the moment the last sword hit the ground, the unarmed soldiers were attacked. They were slaughtered methodically. Only the commander survived, because he agreed to convert to Judaism. In Rome, the conclusion was clear. There was no one left to negotiate with. The rebels, meanwhile, were intoxicated by their first successes. The governor Cestius Gallus arrived to crush the uprising with the 12th Legion. After standing before the walls of Jerusalem, he withdrew, and that retreat became a disaster. In the pass of Beth Horon, Jewish fighters shot down Romans from the heights of the cliffs.
Trapped in a stone funnel, legionaries abandoned siege engines and even the wounded. 6,000 soldiers were killed, and the rebels captured the legion's eagle, the highest symbol of Roman military honor. The victors returned to Jerusalem in triumph, dragging catapults behind them. Voices of reason drowned in the roar of celebration. The war party took absolute power, refusing to hear a simple truth: Rome never forgives that kind of humiliation. Somewhere in Greece, the general Vespasian received his orders from the emperor. The Roman war machine began to move, to wipe Jerusalem from the map.
Emperor Nero sent Vespasian to Judea, a man far from the palace elite. They called him the Mule for his stubborn endurance. He was a professional, a man of war rather than court intrigue. Vespasian arrived with an army of 60,000 and his son Titus. He did not rush to storm the capital. Instead, he methodically cut Judea apart, district by district, stripping Jerusalem of resources and support. Galilee fell first. The mountain fortress of Jotapata held out for 47 days. Roman engineering met Jewish ingenuity. When legionaries built siege ramps, the defenders raised the walls higher. Against battering rams, they lowered sacks of hay to soften the blows. During an assault, they poured a boiled mixture of fenugreek onto the armored Romans, turning the slope into a slick slide. Soldiers could not keep their footing and tumbled down under a storm of stones.
But Roman tactics ground down any resistance through numbers and relentless pressure. Jotapata fell, and 40,000 people were killed. Next came Gamala, clinging to a cliff. When the Romans broke in, 5,000 defenders and their families threw themselves into the ravine, choosing death over captivity. On the Sea of Galilee, fugitives in boats were overtaken by Roman rafts. The water turned red, and bodies washed onto the shore for weeks. All of Galilee became ashes. Thousands of surviving radicals and refugees flooded into Jerusalem. They came seeking safety behind the walls, but brought chaos with them. Vespasian had driven all his enemies into one trap, expecting the infighting to begin. Among the captives at Jotapata was the fortress commander, the man who would preserve this war for history.
The main source for this war is a man who should have died, Joseph, son of Matthias. After Jotapata fell, he and 40 fighters hid in a cave. Knowing there was no escape, they chose death rather than surrender. Because suicide was forbidden, they agreed to kill one another by drawing lots. Joseph, unwilling to die, used calculation. He positioned himself in the circle so that he would be the last alive. When all his companions were dead, Joseph persuaded the only other survivor to surrender. Together they walked out to the Romans. To his own people, he became a traitor. He was brought before Vespasian, and there Joseph took an astonishing risk. He told the general, "You want to kill me, but I am the voice of God. Nero will soon die, and you and your son Titus will become emperors." Vespasian, being superstitious, did not execute the audacious prisoner. He kept him in chains near headquarters, and so Joseph, son of Matthias, became Josephus Flavius, a Roman citizen and chronicler. He stayed beside Titus until the very end, recording every detail of his people's destruction. Meanwhile, his prophecy began to come true. Nero's death plunged the empire into chaos. In the year 69 AD, Rome was consumed by civil war, the year of the 4 emperors. Galba, Otho, and Vitellius replaced one another through murder and coups. Vespasian halted the campaign in Judea, waiting to see who would take the throne. Jerusalem received almost 2 years of breathing space. That time could have been used to strengthen the walls, build supplies, and unite forces. Instead, the city turned on itself. The most radical elements poured into the capital. a leader from the north, John of Gishkala, brought a band of cutthroats and seized power, crushing the moderate priests. Trying to counterbalance him, the citizens opened the gates to Simon Bar-Jora, commander of a huge army of runaway slaves and criminals. Instead of unity, Jerusalem gained two tyrants who hated each other more than they hated the Romans. Ordinary people became hostages in their own city. Soon, a third force entered the conflict. By the year 70 AD, the city was split into three hostile zones. In the inner court of the temple, right by the altar, Eleazar and his zealot fanatics held their ground. Outside, in the outer court, John of Gishkala besieged them, building towers to fire into the sanctuary. The rest of the city was controlled by Simon Bar-Jora, attacking John from below. The sacred place became a battlefield. During sacrifices, arrows and stones fell onto priests. The factions used captured Roman throwing machines against one another. In a moment of madness, the leaders made a fatal mistake. Jerusalem had grain stores for years of siege, but in their clashes, Simon's men set fire to John's granaries, and John's fighters destroyed the enemy's warehouses in return. The flames consumed the strategic food reserves. The fanatics believed hunger would force the people to fight more fiercely, relying only on a miracle. With that, they signed the city's death warrant. When Titus's army finally reached the walls, Jerusalem was already doomed. Titus, hungry for quick glory, nearly died on the first day. While scouting with a small unit, he was cut off from his main force. Without helmet or armor, he hacked his way through a crowd of enemies and escaped by sheer luck. It showed him there would be no easy victory. The Romans launched full siege works. Massive iron-plated towers rose opposite the walls. Ballistae and scorpions hammered the defenders without pause, while powerful battering rams struck the masonry day and night. The legionaries broke through the first and second walls, but the defenders fought for every meter, launching daring sorties. Titus decided to change tactics and starve the city into surrender. The army built a wall around Jerusalem. 60,000 soldiers raised an 8-kilometer earthwork in 3 days, cutting down every tree in the area. The city was completely isolated. No one could enter or leave. Hunger became Rome's main weapon. Inside the besieged city, normal human limits vanished. Survival became the only goal. Armed fighters burst into homes, torturing residents for food. If someone did not look thin enough, they were accused of hiding supplies. People ate leather belts, sandals, and straw. The dead were no longer buried. Bodies were thrown from the walls into the trenches. Jerusalem filled with the stench of decay. The most horrific episode recorded by Josephus took place in the home of a noble woman named Mary. Driven mad by hunger, she killed her infant and cooked the child as food. When looters arrived, demanding to be fed, she offered them what remained. Shocked by what they saw, even they backed away. Outside the walls, the Romans used terror as a method. Fugitives caught trying to escape were crucified in full view of the city. Hundreds were executed every day. Around Jerusalem, a forest of crosses rose, meant to break the defenders' will. The rebel leaders used it as an argument. Surrender would mean a slow, agonizing death. Titus understood that he had to strike the strategic heart of the defense, the Antonia fortress. The Antonia fortress loomed over the temple, the key to the sanctuary. For 3 weeks, the Romans built enormous siege ramps, but the defenders dug tunnels beneath them, braced the passages with wooden supports, and set them on fire. The ground collapsed, and the siege engines fell into flames. The work of thousands of legionaries was destroyed in minutes. Realizing machines alone were not enough, Titus relied on surprise. At night, a small group of volunteers quietly climbed the walls, killed the sleeping guards, and sounded a trumpet signal. In panic, the defenders assumed the entire army was already on the walls and fell back toward the temple. The fight moved into narrow passages. In darkness and tight space, a brutal hand-to-hand battle raged for 10 hours. The defenders managed to push the Romans back, but the fortress was lost. Titus ordered Antonia leveled to the ground to clear a platform for the attack on the temple.
The battle shifted onto sacred ground. The Romans stood before the temple walls. For 6 days, battering rams struck the masonry without success. Titus ordered the gates burned, opening the way into the courts. It was the 9th of Av, the date of the destruction of the first temple, instantly. Titus tried to stop the blaze, but soldiers, drunk on hatred, did not listen. Flames swallowed the entire structure. At the altar, where thousands had crowded together, a massacre began. Legionaries killed without distinction. Blood ran down the steps, mixing with molten gold as it streamed from the walls. After the fire, soldiers pried up the foundation stones to reach the solidified metal. From the greatest sanctuary, only ruins remained.
The war moved underground. Rebel leaders and thousands of fighters hid in the sewers. The Romans cleared the city methodically, opening manholes and killing everyone they found. In the wet tunnels, people killed one another for a piece of bread or took their own lives. Simon Bar-Jorah tried to escape by dressing in white robes on the temple site, hoping to frighten the guards. He was captured and sent to Rome for execution. John of Gishkala surrendered from hunger and received life imprisonment. According to Josephus, more than 1 million people died. 97,000 were sold into slavery. Jerusalem was destroyed completely. Titus left only 3 towers standing as a monument to his victory. In the south, only the fortress of Masada continued to resist.
In the impregnable fortress of Masada, 960 Sicarii took refuge with their families. The 10th Legion spent months building a gigantic earthen ramp to reach the summit. When the battering ram broke the wall, the Romans delayed the assault until morning. The defenders' leader, Eleazar ben Yair, convinced the people not to surrender. The men killed their families to spare them slavery. Then they burned their property, leaving only food as proof that the choice was voluntary. 10 men chosen by lot killed the rest. Then 1 man killed the remaining 9, and finally himself. In the morning, the Romans entered silence and found only bodies. Masada fell, but it did not surrender. On the Arch of Titus in Rome, a relief still shows legionaries carrying the menorah from the temple in Jerusalem. Nearby stands the Colosseum, built with gold taken from Judea and by the hands of Jewish captives. That amphitheater is a gigantic monument to a city that died. This war's story shows that the most dangerous enemy is not an army at the gate, but fanaticism within. Hatred that divides the world into us and traitors makes people burn their own bread and kill their future for an idea. The Romans simply waited until Jerusalem destroyed itself.